Theo will be on. So thank you for all showing up. It's 2:02, and I am going to still allow some people in the room, and I may have to stop to allow a couple more people in the room. But my name is Evan Weiner, and this talk, a couple things about this talk. One is I speak on cruise ships, and usually when I speak on cruise ships, this one is saved only once do I do it, and it's from the New Jersey to Eastern Canada back to New Jersey run. And it's basically the day that we leave Halifax. The next day is a sea day, and we're going back to New York. And for those who go on the cruise ships generally out of New York, they're not from the New York area. So they asked me to put together this for that particular cruise ship. And why not? I am from Manhattan. I lived in Queens. I lived in Rockland County. I lived in Westchester. This is where I've spent my entire life. And this is New York, New York. My name is Evan Weiner, and this talk came about, probably the genesis of this talk starts around 1999. My daughter went to school with David Hartman. Yes, the David Hartman who is Lucas Tanner on TV and also the host of Good Morning America. And my daughter and David's son, Connor, were in a play together, and we got to know each other. And I came to greatly admire David because there were some adverse circumstances, and it was unbecoming somebody who's a morning show talk host who are usually, above everything and above it all. But David wasn't, and he was there every night with his son and my daughter, who were the leads of the play, and I got to know him. And we got to talking, and I said, "What's your next project?" And he says, "I'm talking to PBS now. I want to do a show, a series of shows about the streets of New York." And I said, "Well, what about the streets of New York?" He says, "Well, let's take 42nd Street, for example. Let's start at the East River, and we'll end at the Hudson River and go every site in between and spend some time talking about the site. And let's go up and down Broadway, do the same thing." Unfortunately, PBS didn't bite on the show. He had to go to WETA in Washington looking for funding, and they said, "Who cares?" Who cares? And so the show never took place, although there was a version of the show done by Barry Lewis locally on Channel 13 WNAT. So that's New York, New York. That's Federal Hall. That's where George Washington took the oath of office to become the first president of the United States. In 1970, in the middle of the Kent State killings and the demonstrations on colleges and the Jackson State killings after the United States invaded Cambodia to cut off the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Federal Hall was the site of the Hard Hat Riot. And it was organized by a guy by the name of Peter J. Brenner, who eventually would become labor secretary under Nixon. And there were some angry people at Federal Hall back in May of 1970. And the last time I was there for a seminar. It's an interesting place. After all, this place matters. George Washington took the oath of office there. New York, actually, part of New York's beginning is down in Phillipsburg, St. Martin's, and that is in the Caribbean, and that is a statue with old Peg-Leg Pete, Peter Stuyvesant, who was sent down to the Caribbean by the Dutch Indies Company to basically consolidate business down there. And eventually he would be sent up to New Netherlands, and he was the last Dutch governor of New Netherlands, New York, that would be turned over to the English in 1664. So Pete, he never saw the cruise ships going up and down the Hudson, nor did he see the Verrazano Bridge. And there is David Hartman and my wife back in 1999. We're talking about New York, New York. New York City was founded in 1624, New Amsterdam. And Lower Manhattan was a trading post by the colonists of the Dutch Republic and was named New Amsterdam in 1626. There's not much left from the old New Amsterdam days. Of course, there are some names like Stuyvesant High School and some names up in the Bronx, but pretty much it's been forgotten that the Dutch actually were in New York or in New Amsterdam before the English. In 1644, came under English control and was named New York after, or renamed New York after King Charles II of England granted the lands to his brother, the Duke of New York. New York was one of the early day capitals of the United States, serving as the capital from 1785 to 1790, among the other capitals of the United States, Princeton, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. But Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson had a lot to do with both New York being the capital and not being the capital, and yet New York becoming the financial capital of the United States. New York has been America's largest city since 1790. Washington said, "See you later." Hey, Washington didn't feel like he really didn't want anymore to be the general. I mean, he was away from home from 1776 to 1783, and he was a Brit. He was also a trader. I don't know if you know that or not, but all those guys, all the founding fathers of the United States were all traders. But he's had enough. He's about 51 years old at the time and has been away from home, been away from Martha, but he was English, and the English did a lot of things at taverns, like, down in Barbados, the Treaty of Barbados. That was the Mermaid Tavern where they came up with that. Oh, by the way, the Charter of Barbados probably was the basis for the Declaration of Independence, but that's another talk. Fraunces Tavern is at 54 Pearl Street at the corner of Broadway, Broad Street, rather. The location played a prominent role in history, and during and after the American Revolution, it served as the headquarters for George Washington. It was a venue for peace negotiations between 1781 and 1783 with the British, and housing federal officials in the early republic. Hey, why not? You work at one part of the building, go downstairs and have some tea or something else. After the British troops evacuated on November 25th, 1783, the tavern hosted a week later an elaborate turtle feast dinner on December 4th, 1783, in the building's long room for General George Washington, where he said goodbye to the officers of the Continental Army and was supposed to just ride his horse into the sunset or down to Virginia until he was called back to the Continental Congress back about 3 years later, and then laid into them, saying that the Articles of Confederation's nothing more than sand. It really wasn't anything. And then he would be elected president and build the federal government in New York. I know that a lot of you want to go see Hamilton, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen Hamilton and look at the price tag. But you want to do something for nothing? Really nice thing? Go to the Hamilton Custom House right near the Staten Island Ferry. It's free. They have Smithsonian exhibits, and it's beautifully restored. I remember my grandmother was, she worked for the Department of Motor Vehicle in Lower Manhattan in the 1960s. I remember going to this building, and it was a wreck. They have cleaned up this building, completely cleaned up the building. Now, Hamilton was a star before Broadway. So a star many, many years ago. George Washington found him during the Revolutionary War, and he became Washington's aide-de-camp. And one thing that Hamilton liked was New York. In fact, he loved New York. And he and Jefferson got into this thing about where the capital should be and where the financial capital should be. In fact, there's a song in the Hamilton play about the money, money, money. Hamilton wanted to keep the money in New York. Hamilton designed the Treasury for the United States, But he didn't really care too much about New York being the capital of the United States. And he tells Jefferson, hey, you know what? Let's keep the money here. Take the capital wherever you want. And Jefferson had this fine swampland in between Maryland and Virginia on the Potomac, and they cut the deal. We keep the money, take the government. We don't want it anyway here. We'll be a lot more prosperous with the money. Alexander Hamilton, the Compromise of 1790. The deal let New York, where Hamilton lived, become the financial center while creating Washington, D.C. as the nation's capital. Hamilton played New York long before he was a play. 1791, Hamilton helped establish the country's first national bank, in New York, of course. 1792, Hamilton helped to create the Coinage Act, which established the U.S. Mint and the U.S. dollar. And by the way, it comes to my mind, I was at CVS this morning, and at CVS, it said, please use exact change or your credit card because there's a shortage of coins right now. So Hamilton is totally New York, and Hamilton gets his face on the $10 bill. Brook-a-lyn, Brooklyn, Brooklyn. Now, in the old days when people used to speak with Brooklyn accents, you remember those accents, D's, dems, and does. He was over there, a toity-toyed and toyed. I used to speak like that until my college teacher, Jim McCarthy, straightened out my accent. Anyway, New York, yeah, you got the Battery and you got the Bronx, but you didn't have Brooklyn. In 1898, New York added Brooklyn. The subway system opened in 1904. It was first built as a bunch of separate systems, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, and all that. And this helps bind the city together. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, the city became a world center for industry, the garment industry. The garment industry is where my grandfather worked. And they had a little place on Staten Street, Lower Manhattan, my grandfather and my uncle. Commerce and communications. Oh, back to Hamilton again, back to Hamilton, and back to Aaron Burr. Burr was the vice president under Thomas Jefferson. He's allegedly living down in the Washington, D.C. area, but Burr never left New York or left him. He was in New York, as was Hamilton. And somebody said something and somebody challenged somebody to a duel, but not New York, over across in Weehawken. And there was no George Washington Bridge in those days, no Lincoln Tunnel. You had to take a boat across to witness the duel. The Burr-Hamilton duel was fought Weehawken, New Jersey, and it was the vice president. Think of today. Think of today. Think of Vice President Harris having a duel with somebody. Although, you know, I'm thinking to some like Zell Miller, the senator from Georgia back about 20 years ago. He said he would have loved to challenge Chris Matthews, who was on MSNBC at the time, to a duel. This occurred on July 11th, 1804. And these guys had a long and bitter rivalry, and they accepted each other's challenge, and Burr, of course, would kill them. Kill Hamilton. After they counted 10 paces, Hamilton aimed his pistol at the sky, but accidentally shot the tree branch directly above Aaron Burr's head. Burr had already assumed the position, fired his shot, which hit Hamilton directly in his left rib cage. Hamilton was carried to the home of William Bayard Jr., and he died the next day. Hey, the Statue of Liberty said, come. That was a John Lennon song. Que Pasa, New York, New York, New York, 1972. A forgettable album, but Que Pasa, New York was probably the best song on there. And Lennon in 1974 took a very similar picture when he was fighting immigration that wanted to send him back to England. And it's the Statue of Liberty. Statue of Liberty said, come. I don't know if the Statue of Liberty said come, but next to the Statue of Liberty was Ellis Island. Or is Ellis Island. Statue of Liberty, enlightening the world, was a gift of friendship from the people of France to the United States and is recognized as a universal symbol of freedom and democracy. The Statue of Liberty was dedicated on October 28, 1886. But it took a long time, 38 years, to be designated as a national monument. And of course, Emma Lazarus' poem is at the base of the Statue of Liberty. And it is the Statue of Liberty. And Ellis Island. My well, I'm probably speaking for a lot of people in this room that my ancestors came through Ellis Island. And Ellis Island was left abandoned in 1954. And it was Lee Iacocca that led the charge to rebuild or to clean up Ellis Island and make it this magnificent museum, part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument. Ellis Island was the gateway for over 12 million immigrants to the United States and was the nation's busiest immigrant inspection station from 1892 until 1954. The island was made part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument in 1963, and the Museum of Immigration opened in 1990. And before I go on, there were other entries into the United States, including Boston, and Galveston, Texas. Galveston, Texas was an entry. If you go to Halifax, and like I said, this talk actually emanates the day after we leave Halifax back to Cape Liberty, the old naval base over in New Jersey and Bayonne. There is a museum similar to that in Halifax. And in fact, most immigration in the United States was cut off in 1924, particularly people from Eastern Europe. 1924 is it. We don't want you anymore. And there is a museum, similar museum up in Halifax. They cut off immigration, the Brits. Because they were running Canada in those days in 1933. And there you go through America's gateway. And I am sure it did not look that clean or that nice during the heyday of Ellis Island. Now, the worst terrorist attack ever on U.S. soil was September 11th, 2001. And I'm not going to go through that. It brought down the World Trade Center, both towers, and most of us who are from New York and of a certain age know the whole story. But I'm going to point out Trinity Church. Trinity Church, St. Paul's Chapel, which was literally in the shadow of the old two buildings at the World Trade Center. St. Paul's Chapel, or the little chapel that stood, is an Episcopalian chapel at 209 Broadway between Fulton Street and Vesey Street. It is the oldest surviving church in Manhattan, and remarkably, almost received no damage after the attacks on the World Trade Center. At the rear of St. Paul's Chapel faces Church Street. That's the opposite, the east side of the World Trade Center site. After the attack on September 11th, which led to the collapse of the Twin Towers, St. Paul's Chapel served as a place of rest and refuge for recovery workers at the WT site. And you go in there, and there are all kinds of pictures from that horrible day on September 11th, 2001. For 8 months, hundreds of volunteers worked 12-hour shifts around the clock, serving meals, making beds, counseling, and praying. With firefighters, construction workers, police, and others, massage therapists, chiropractors, podiatrists, musicians also tended to their needs. The church survived, not even a broken window. And this is a view from lower Manhattan down on, I guess it's Grand Street, of the new tower that replaced the Twin Towers. And from East Broadway, there's another view of that. Now let's talk about David Hartman's 42nd Street. So David has got this plan. He's got it all mapped out. He's looking for funding. And as you can see there, that is still, in my opinion, the greatest looking building in New York, the Chrysler Building. And behind it is one of the new pencil skyscrapers, which I could live without. I don't think aesthetically they add anything. I mean, look at the Chrysler Building. It looks unique and it looks regal. Anyway, David Hartman's 42nd Street. So he's talking to WEAT people down in Washington and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this, 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 this. I think the nation would be interested. After all, how many people in the nation can trace back their roots to Ellis Island? which is an island just outside of Manhattan. Well, let's talk about David Hartman's 42nd Street and what you might have seen in the show had the show ever been produced about 20 years ago. David Hartman did a few shows on PBS eventually, but not on this. But he wanted to do a walking tour of streets, and one was going from the East River to the Hudson on 42nd Street, from the United Nations to an area close to the Intrepid Museum and also the Circle Line boat that goes around Manhattan, essentially, but you could see other boroughs. Well, start out in the United Nations. United Nations. That was formed after World War II, and finally they got to Manhattan around 1948, 1949 on some land owned by Rockefeller. The United Nations, I don't know how effective or ineffective it is, but at least diplomats have a chance to talk to one another in an effort to maybe quell some problems like the Cold War or other wars that took place. There is something called the Tolerance Museum. That is in the Superman building, the old Daily News building. There's a Tolerance Museum in there. And then, of course, there's that regal-looking Chrysler building, which was once owned by Jack Kent Cooke. It is just a magnificent Art Deco building built in the 1930s, and it just looks great and still looks great to this day. Oh, by the way, I used to work for WNEW Radio, and WNEW Radio, when I was working there between 1978 and 1981, I was 21 years old when I started doing some news work for them, was also on 42nd Street, as was the Horn and Hearted. You might remember the Horn and Hearted, right? Grand Central Terminal, the building that Jackie Kennedy saved, that was scheduled to be demolished. And Jackie Kennedy saw that Penn Station over at 7th and 8th Avenue and 33rd and 31st Street was demolished for a new Madison Square Garden. She thought it would be awful, just a shame, if Grand Central Terminal was demolished. And in the 1970s, she led the way, protesting to make sure that Grand Central Terminal was still there for many generations to come. Oh, behind there, it's the MetLife building. But it wasn't the MetLife building. It was Pan Am, the Pan Am building. And remember, Pan Am introduced the jet age with the Boeing 707 and would take you from New York to Paris in record time. And the New York Public Library. Oh, yeah, and also there probably are some psychics. I never understood the psychics. You know, the psychics, they never go out of business. I don't understand that, but hey, you ask them some question, not necessarily about you, about something else. Hey, how would I know? I'm not a psychic, which reminds me of the amazing Kreskin. I went out with somebody back in 1976. Her father was the head of the IRS in Philadelphia, and he wanted to do the amazing Kreskin's IRS file. They were calling him down. And he said to Kreskin, he said, Mr. Kreskin, why are you here? Oh, I don't know. You tell me. Well, you're the psychic. Aren't you supposed to know? Well, Kreskin was behind in his taxes. And Bryant Park, and there is Gertrude Stein, a statue of Gertrude Stein, who once said of Oakland, there's no there. Crossroads of America, Times Square. And I guess at this point, as we speak here on November 21st, 2021, that there will be the ball drop. And Dick Clark was there. Before him was Ben Grauber. I don't know if you remember Ben Grauber or not. He was there for NBC, and then they made this big deal with Dick Clark, and now CNN is there. I guess Anderson Cooper is there as well, and the ball drops. It's a little different ball right now, but you know, people are herded into Times Square, and they put you in cages. So you better have a good bladder, because if you don't, you're not going to get out of that cage for 8 hours, so you may have a problem. But what always amazes me is it clears out within 20 minutes. Like, everybody goes to the subway. That's it. We're out of here. Goodbye. Farewell. The Crossroads of America, Times Square. where the New York Times used to have its headquarters. Now it's over on 40th Street, across the street from Port Authority. And the Hudson with New Jersey, and the sunset over the Hudson River, close to where the Intrepid ship is. Now, Hartman wanted to do this. He thought this might have been a rather interesting walk, you know, going back, talking about the seedy days of Times Square, the seedy days when 42nd Street was known as 40 Deuce. And you had the X-rated movies and everything else that was going on. Now it's been cleaned up, Disney-fied in a lot of ways. You could take your family there. At one time, you couldn't. The High Line. Hey, you could walk in Manhattan on an old railroad line. Now, this was another decaying place, an absolute decaying place. It was attached to some buildings, including the Morgan post office, where my father worked back in the early 1960s. And somebody said, hey, you know what? Why don't we renovate the old railroad tracks, make it a nice walking area? And they've done so. And they're doing the same thing across the river in New Jersey with some old railroad tracks. And it's a nice walk, particularly on a good day. The High Line is a 1.45 mile New York City linear park built in Manhattan on an elevated section of a disused New York Central Railroad spur called the West Line. The High Line is built on the disused southern portion of the West Side Line running from lower Manhattan to the west side of Manhattan. Oh, it's a problem. There's going to be congestion pricing soon enough. Soon enough. Ever try to get a spot in New York? Stop praying. God's too busy to find you a parking spot. Instead, use Edison Park Fast. Maybe they'll have a spot. That's typical New York humor, right? Oh, the Lower East Side. I was born on the Lower East Side. I was born there as the Lower East Side was changing. I was born in 1956. We were out of there in 1964. But there were some remnants, or are some remnants of my childhood, like at 367 Grand Street, Kosar Bialys. I love Bialys. I don't know how many of you love Bialys, but I love Bialys. Now, the thing is that the family that owned the place is long gone. It was bought by somebody else and then sold and bought by somebody else. And they're upscaling the thing. They're moving over to the west side in the development on the west side by Madison Square Garden. And it's like, no, it's Kosar Bagels. It's supposed to be dirty, dingy, filthy, with sawdust all over the place. That's how you enjoy a Bialy. Now, there used to be Gus's Pickles down on Essex Street. This is actually a popular tourist spot for people. I have seen buses loaded with tourists just get out on the corner of Grand Street and Essex Street, go in to buy pickles. I've seen lines of like 30 minutes long with the guy in the bus just waiting for these people so they could buy the pickles. It's a descendant of Gus's Pickles. It's not Gus's Pickles, a descendant of it. The Lower East Side, Little Italy. I remember when Little Italy was huge. It's now 2 blocks on Mulberry Street. Ferraris, hey, they've been there forever. They're on Grand Street. There's also an Italian Heritage Museum across from there. And Chinatown, which has grown exponentially and has taken over. They have taken over most of what used to be Little Italy. Most of what used to be Little Italy, of course, is up on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx or in that area. I love Bugs Bunny cartoons. I absolutely love Bugs Bunny cartoons and still watch them to this day. And again, if David Hartman wanted to do something about the Bowery, there is plenty of stuff to do about the Bowery. In fact, if you go down to the Bowery, you're going to see all of these wall plaques. And the wall plaques tell you about the buildings there. Now, this particular one I like the most because Bowery Bugs, and it's Bugs Bunny and Steve Brody and some old guy talking about how Steve Brody jumped off this Brooklyn Bridge, which may or may not have happened. at least there's a story that it happened, and it was a really great cartoon. And Steve Brody's saloon was there. Man survives leap from the Brooklyn Bridge, except he probably never did it. Oh, when a bank was a bank. Remember when a bank was a bank? And this is the corner of Grand Street and the Bowery. Now take a look at the modern bank. Take a look at that old bank, which is an HSBC bank. And you could go in there and you don't have to bank. And you look at the magnificent ceiling that's in there, and you look at just the construction of this place. And the reason it was built like a fortress was that they kept money there. Not like TD Bank there, where they keep some money there, but not like they did back in the day when a bank was a bank. It's actually a pretty good place to walk in, because you would be amazed. Now, some of the old banks in Lower Manhattan have become places like Walgreens and CVS's, and they're magnificent buildings. And they haven't changed the character of the buildings either. These buildings were great. Oh, there's Central Park. Lots of statues in Central Park. Central Park, of course, is the oasis in Manhattan, from 59th Street up to 110th Street, from Fifth Avenue across to Central Park West. And they got a lot of things for a lot of people, including a zoo, including a carousel, including an ice skating rink. In fact, they got 2 ice skating rinks there, and they got places where there can be concerts, Sheep Meadow, and they got John Lennon, the memorial, the Mansion Memorial over on 72nd, 73rd Street on West End Avenue, rather Central Park West, overlooking the Dakotas. By the way, the Dakotas, where John Lennon and Yoko Ono lived, was the backdrop for Rosemary's Baby. My story about the Dakotas, I worked with John Madden. John had a place in the Dakotas, and I once walked in and was amazed to get to his place. You got to go through this and hoops and all that. And he looks at me, "Hey, Wiener, you're supposed to be smart. How come you had to call me 6 times to get to find this place?" Even John Robinson, who's a coach in the NFL, even he knew how to get here. I thought you were smart. Dakotas is a really eerie building. And the Plaza Hotel, where the Beatles first stayed when they came to America. Now it's apartments. The Plaza used to be the epitome of New York in terms of where to stay in New York. The Beatles stayed there in 1964, and the Beatles are coming back this week on Disney with their old Get Back, Let It Be sessions, 6 hours on Disney. Arts and culture, well, that's New York. New York is arts and cultures, art and culture. And it could be anywhere. It could be in the middle of the park. It could be in a museum. And it could be with this guy, my old friend Gabarron, the Spanish artist who designed what you just saw with my wife standing in front of me for a UN celebration. And Central Park, and those ugly buildings, which are now blocking the light actually out of Central Park. And then there's Museum Mile, Fifth Avenue. That's the City of New York Museum. On the Upper East Side, that would be where you have all sorts of museums, from Metropolitan to the City Museum. And inside the City Museum, there's a statue of Fred Lebow. And of course, Fred Lebow was the founder of the New York City Marathon. And my daughter-in-law, I was talking to her one day, and she was a runner and was in the New York City Marathon. And she said, "Oh, did you see the statue of Fred Lebow?" I said, "Yeah, I did, except I knew the real life Fred Lebow. He wasn't a statue when I used to talk to him." That's one thing about me getting older and being in the journalism business. There are a lot of statues out there, or bridges like the Mario Cuomo Bridge. And I said, I knew Mario Cuomo before he was a bridge. Arts and entertainment capital of the world? Well, Los Angeles has movies, Los Angeles has TV, although a lot has migrated back to New York. By the way, the first movie capital of the world was Fort Lee, New Jersey. And if you go to the Fort Lee Library in the parking lot, you're going to see all kind of signs talking about what movies were shot on the lot there that the library now sits in Fort Lee. It was where the first movies were done in New York. Anyway, that guy in the middle, family member. Jerry Stiller of Stiller and Mirror, father of Amy Stiller. Well, Amy Stiller is a writer. And some guy named Ben Stiller, except I prefer my great uncle Ben Stiller, Benny Stiller. Used to wear a tie and had a tie clip, big, big letters on his tie clip, BS. Anyway, that's Jerry with my kids back in 1994. Carnegie Hall. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Know who saved Carnegie Hall? Jack Benny. Jack Benny and Isaac Stern with a big concert in the very early 1960s. Carnegie Hall was set for the wrecking ball. But it was saved. Now they got the Carnegie Towers. And one of the last times I walked by there, is this little comedian that popped out of the Carnegie Towers. And I'm looking at my wife, it's about 3-4 years ago. Says, "Is that Jackie Mason?" She looks, she says, "Yeah, that's Jackie Mason." I see Jackie's getting long. Somebody recognized me. I said, "You think I should talk to him?" And my wife said, "Yeah, why not?" I said, "Nah," just walked away. He was totally deflated. Hey, showbiz, right? He got over it. Jackie Mason just passed away not too long ago. Anyway, Carnegie Hall, practice, practice, practice. This was a night that my wife and I were in Carnegie Hall, and we were watching some sort of orchestra. Practice, practice, practice. Now, this building doesn't mean too much to anybody here, but means a lot to me. It is 97 Eldridge Street. And that's where I lived as a baby through the age of 8, down the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And it meant something to Ira Gershwin. Ira Gershwin was born in that building back in the 1890s. And I was actually born in Manhattan General Hospital, which is now Beth Israel Hospital. But that's where I lived. I lived in the same building that Ira Gershwin lived in, and they moved around a lot. Meyerhoff, the grocery store, was to the your left in the picture. So, but anyway, Tin Pan Alley and acting. It's Charles Grodin, who recently passed away. And Charlie invited me to he was doing a reading. He was going to do a play. And John Lovitz was there that day. And Charlie invited me down and said, "Hey, why don't you come down to the audience and let me know what you think?" And my wife, who went to Juilliard, speaking of entertainment, Juilliard, of course, in Lincoln Center, started to sing. And he's singing these songs. And my wife knows all the songs, and Charles stops, stands up, and starts leading her. So she was on Broadway, my wife. So she would sing. And there is Charles after that. By the way, the treatment and the reading of the play never went anywhere. And speaking of Lincoln Center, there it is, Lincoln Center. Now, Lincoln Center, that's the second Lincoln Center. And as my wife has said, the acoustics in what used to be Avery Fisher Hall, now I think it's Geffen Hall, David Geffen Hall, were not good. They were not good. The building was built modern. The old places used to have great acoustics, absolutely great acoustics. Carnegie Hall. When Carnegie Hall was going to be knocked down, Robert Moses suggested that the next music house should be in the middle of Central Park. That's one that Robert Moses didn't win. And it's good for everybody that Robert Moses didn't win that. And there is Lincoln Center today. The communications capital of the world. Yeah, that's it. All the wire services are here. All the networks are here. Ted Turner didn't want to put CNN in New York. Why? Because the New York banks didn't believe in CNN. And the Rainbow Room up on top of Rockefeller Center and NBC Studios. And there I am on MSNBC in 2013. Rob, to my left, is now the head of the Connecticut State Lottery Commission. I was on the Up with Steve Kornacki show back in 2013. Sports Capital. Yogi. Brian Cashman, the general manager of the Yankees. This is a picture taken in 2011. Yogi, what time is it? You mean right now? Hey, if you see a fork in the road, take it. Ain't over until it's over. Ain't over until it's over. Sports, Yankees, Mets, Giants, Knicks. Jets, Rangers, Islanders, Nets, Devils, NYCFC, Red Bulls, St. John's University, Seton Hall University, the New York City Marathon, the Belmont Stakes, the U.S. Open. That's all part of the New York landscape. And you could throw in, of course, Army football up on the Hudson River. And a lot of people just go there, not to see in the fall, not to see Army football, but the great fall foliage up the Hudson River. Sports is huge. Sports is huge. And there's me down in the bottom of that picture. I'm kind of leaning over with a blue shirt as Ricky Henderson has a news conference on August the 3rd, 1993. And sports business capital of the world. There I am, right in the middle of that picture, talking to Harvey Meyerson, who was Donald Trump's personally picked attorney in the National Football League USFL trial in 1986. Harvey won the trial but lost the money. Part as a jury only gave the USFL a buck. Stunned with the decision, Harvey forgot to canvass the jurors. And that was the end of that. Couldn't get any more money. Outside of Manhattan, Brook-a-lyn, Coney Island, is the annual disgusting, repulsive hot dog eating contest, which I have to watch because it's like rubbernecking. You got to watch Joey Chestnut go, ah, ah, ah. And anyway, that's in Brooklyn. And Nathan's, of course, is a famous hot dog from Coney Island. The Brooklyn Bridge. Anybody want to buy the Brooklyn Bridge? I have it for sale. The Brooklyn Bridge is a hybrid cable-stayed suspension bridge. It's one of the oldest bridges of that type in the United States. It was completed in 1883, connects Manhattan and Brooklyn, spanning the East River. The main span is 1,595.5 feet. It was the first steel wire suspension bridge constructed. It was designated as a national landmark in 1964, a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark in 1972. And a lot of people got either died or got sick building that thing back in the 1880s. The best free, absolutely free attraction in New York is the Staten Island Ferry. Great views of Manhattan, absolute spectacular views of lower Manhattan, and it's free. It's free. All you have to do is hop on the Staten Island Ferry. It's a nice little ride, about 20 minutes back and forth, and hey, it's a good way to spend the day. And then in Queens, the Unisphere. How many of you were at the World's Fair in 1964? Well, not much survives from the 1964-65 World's Fair. The Unisphere has been rebuilt. And hey, anybody who went to the 64-65 World's Fair, did you kind of sneak in? Because I heard if you walked on the beam next to the Grand Central Parkway and you just walked up to an area where there was always a garbage can, all you did was flip over the garbage can, hop over the fence, and voila, you were there. You got to go to the World's Fair for nothing. If each of New York City's boroughs were an independent city, Queens would be the fourth most populous in the nation after Los Angeles, Chicago, and Brooklyn. Queens is the most ethnically diverse urban area in the world. There are 138 languages spoken in the borough, but there's one common language when the New York Mets are not playing well, is spoken at their stadium. It's one word, boo. The Mets, the team. This is my wife singing the national anthem a long time ago before a New York Mets-Pittsburgh Pirates game in 1985. There are museums in Queens, Kennedy and LaGuardia Airport, Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, great park to walk through. There's a science museum there. The Mets baseball team, the U.S. Open, Kaufman Astoria Studios, the Silver Cup Studios, and Aqueduct Raceway, which has a casino now, all in Queens. And if you go up to the Bronx, hey, it's great Italian food, and it's reasonable. Arthur Avenue. Welcome to the Bronx, Little Italy. Oh, the Bronx has Yankee Stadium. The Bronx is also the home of the United States' largest metropolitan animal park, the Bronx Zoo. Although Peter Golenbach, who I know, a writer, wrote a book about the New York Yankees called The Bronx Zoo. And the New York Botanical Garden. Little Italy of the Bronx, Arthur Avenue, featuring meat markets, delis, vegetable stands, fish markets, cafes, and restaurants. And if you want real Jewish food, go over to Riverdale on Johnson Avenue. You will find that over on Johnson Avenue in Riverdale. Oh, a couple things. If you ever go across the river, Jersey, some interesting things, and it's very close. Maybe this isn't that close. That's Princeton, New Jersey, but it leads me to another question. That's the Princeton Art Museum, and that's the little Andy Warhol exhibit there. And I always had this question. Why is that Brillo box valuable? Why is it valuable? You go to Costco and you can get similar boxes without any problem. They may be a little cut up, but you know what? You use it to take stuff out of Costco because they don't give you any bags, and it's good. I don't understand it. Why is Warhol's that in a Campbell soup can? And I don't get it. I go to Costco and I look for boxes like that. New York, New York. There's the George Washington Bridge. And there is the Verrazano Bridge going into Staten Island. And hello, Cape Liberty. New York, New York. So wonderful, so nice, they named it twice. Now, as far as Barry Lewis's PBS show, it was about Greenwich Village. Why Greenwich Village, why 4th Street intersects with 10th Street, and the early days of New York City. It was mostly about Greenwich Village. There wasn't really all that much about the Lower East Side, where Jews who came from Ellis Island would pack in. And I got a story about that. One of the reasons Galveston, Texas became an embarkation post was that there were too many Jewish people coming to New York, too many to Boston. And the rabbis got together and noted the anti-Semitism and said, we can't have any more coming here. Can't have any more people coming here. So they said, send them to Galveston, Texas. And that's what they did. As far as today, Lucy took the television industry out of New York in 1951. All of the early days of television shows were done in New York, with a couple exceptions in Chicago, Frank Kukler and Ollie among them. And Lucy brought them to Los Angeles. What was left in New York was the Johnny Carson show, quiz shows, and the network news. Carson left. He went out to Los Angeles. Dick Cavett had his show in New York. Carson did it in Burbank. Merv Griffin did his show out in Los Angeles. In the 1980s and the 1990s, television started to come back to New York. There's a problem in New York right now. There aren't too many studios. There aren't enough studios. And it's the same in Los Angeles because you got 53 different networks now, including Amazon Prime and Netflix and all these other networks. So Stamford, Connecticut has taken a lot of business that came to New York. Yonkers is building a sound stage on the Hudson River. And you will see in Westchester County all these signs, and Rockland County too, and New Jersey, of films being shot in New York. Television has come back to New York. It's more than just CNN and MSNBC and Fox doing all kinds of news. There are shows that are being produced now in New York, and movies produced in New York. Broadway is Broadway. One day it's going to open up again. Broadway is not moving. That's the tourist trap. That is where people come to New York just to see Broadway shows, and that isn't going to change. There are arenas for in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, on the Queens-Nassau border, Newark, for big music shows. Now, the music industry has changed, obviously, a great deal, but there's also plenty of room for things like Ice Capades and Disney on Ice and all that other stuff at the various arenas that are all over the place. So New York never shuts down. Well, they did shut the subway down during the COVID-19 pandemic. You could Go out and buy bagels at 3 o'clock in the morning. You could find something to do in the middle of the night. Anyway, I want to thank everybody about our little trip. And I got a question for you. With David Hartman's series, had there been a series, and there wasn't a series, would David Hartman's series worked? I will let you unmute yourself and we could talk about that or talk about other things in New York. You can put it in the chat box or you can unmute yourself. Any questions, any comments? Even about Stuyvesant. By the way, Stuyvesant is buried in New York. He was never a citizen of England, but he's buried in New York. Do we got Judy? I'll ask you to unmute if you got something. Okay, we got here in chat. I'm from Brooklyn, but I don't think I've ever been to the Dumbo part. Hey, why not? Yeah, why not? I mean, you might as well go. Hey, enjoy the city. Paul, do you have a favorite restaurant? Want a story about that? I'll give you a story about that. I'm covering the USFL NFL trial back in 1986. And I gave a report in WFAL in Tampa, Ted Webb, and somebody from the NFL is monitored it and calls me up. And they said, what were you thinking when you were doing that report? And I said, well, I was at the phone at Grand Central Terminal and I was going to go home. And I'm thinking about, should I have choo-choos? Should I have Ray's? Or should I have Rex or Ray's Pizza? Now, Choo-Choo's is good. It's convenient. It's in Grand Central Terminal. It's the greasy mess that I like. Or I could go to Famous Ray's. But which Famous Ray's do I go to? Because there are a whole bunch of Ray's pizzas. My favorite restaurant, depending on the day, is a pizza place or going to Kosar's. And that's just me. I mean, I do miss the Sign of the Dove restaurant because we used to eat there for nothing. And the 21 Club, we used to eat there for nothing because I was a freeloader in my business, and they used to have talks, events there. And but the 21 Club, you paid for it because everything was loaded with cholesterol. By the way, the maitre d' of the 21 Club at one time was Barbara Walters' father, Lou Walters, who also ended up owning the Latin Quarter in New York and the Latin Quarter in Boston, both of them. Thank you, Marcia Barazzini. Thank you. And thank you, Paul. Anybody else? But that's my favorite restaurant, the pizza place. Because where are you going to get good pizza? In Manhattan, of course, or around here, actually. Anybody else? Well, if there is nothing else, you now know I love pizza, and greasy pizza at that. I want to thank Tracy for inviting me. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I hope everybody has a good Thanksgiving, a healthy Thanksgiving, and whatever holiday that you celebrate in November and December this year, I hope you have a really good holiday. Stay healthy. And thank you, Julie, and thank you, John. And no, I don't know of why you would go to Dumbo other than it's a good place to go. I mean, I go to Coney Island. I go to Brighton Beach, where the jockeys were always white at the 21 Club. That is true. Brighton Beach, want Russian food? Go to Brighton Beach. You'll get Russian food there over at Brighton Beach next to Coney Island. So whatever you want, this city has. And you go to other cities. You know, John McCain, Senator John McCain once said there are only 3 unique cities in the United States: New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans. That's it. New York is one of the unique three. Anyway, my name is Evan Weiner. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tracy, for inviting me to the Eastchester Library. Thank you for coming here today. It's a gorgeous day outside, and hopefully we will see you in the future. Thank you, Tracy, and thanks everybody else. My name is Evan Weiner. Thank you so much for spending 1 hour with me on this gorgeous day. Everybody, so long. And wait, we got one more in the chat. I don't know about that. I just know that the jockeys were what where the statues and everything were that. Anyway, so thank you everybody, and thank you Tracy. And my name is Evan Weiner. I hope you have an enjoyable rest of the day, and we will speak shortly, hopefully, and enjoy the holiday. Take care. Bye.